Portal begins with an incredible and elegant opening sequence. You awake in this small, contained room, confined within 4 glass walls that allow you to see outside to an unreachable area. For a brief moment, as the enrichment program is being explained by an innocuous, disembodied robotic voice, this is your reality. Trapped in a tiny room containing only a bed, a bookshelf, a radio, and a toilet. It's only a minute later that Portal introduces its central gameplay mechanic while using it to free you from this small chamber and into the area which you previously could only look on from behind glass. This moment primes you to recognize the feeling of isolation and imprisonment, the notion of freedom, and the desire of escape. This is how Portal breaks reality. Reality in a video game is defined by the inherent constraints that a game employs when presenting its world. We've seen games present worlds as expansive and vast as the known universe, or as simple and straightforward as 2 paddles and a ball, and while these 2 examples exist on opposite extremes of a vast spectrum, they both wear their levels of complexity on their sleeves. In this sense, there are 2 major tenets that define how we view a game's reality. One is that a game can be anything. There's no amount of simplicity or complexity that a game can employ when presenting its world that isn't believable. And 2, we're primed to understand a game's reality through first impressions, how it chooses to immediately present itself. There's a really clever moment at the beginning of Donkey Kong 94. The game begins like the arcade version of Donkey Kong. You play the exact same levels in the exact same order, but something interesting happens after you beat the last level. Instead of ending or looping like the arcade game would, suddenly you're in a world map, and the game is turned into a puzzle platformer game with over 90 levels. The game has played with our perceptions and created a clever and memorable twist. And this twist works because it acknowledges and takes advantage of these 2 tenets. It's not unreasonable to expect this game would play out like a simple arcade game, and it primes us to view it this way through opening the way that it does. Something similar occurs in Final Fantasy. The game opens with a short quest in a limited section of the game's full overworld, but once you complete this, you're prompted to go across the newly constructed bridge, only for the game to reveal that everything you had just played to that point was only a prologue, and this is where the game truly begins and the world opens up to you. It gives you a taste of the scope, and importantly, the breadth of the adventure ahead. Even something like the opening sequence of Breath of the Wild follows this concept. We're given the opening image of a cold and constricted place, but once we get out of this small sequence, you get the huge reveal of the true size and expansiveness of Hyrule. There's a deliberate artistry to the contrast on display in these moments, an emphasis on size, scope, and detail that makes us reevaluate the kind of game that we're really playing. But these moments occur right at the beginning of their respective games. They're impactful moments, but they aren't lasting. What Portal does with this concept is far more elaborate, far more deceptive, and as a result, far more impactful than these examples. Portal initially presents us with a world that feels uncomfortable in a way that's difficult to explain. There's an inherent level of restrictiveness to the design of the test chambers, the way they mostly take place in linear hallways and rooms. The test chambers are sterile, but also dirty, in such a combination that the chambers feel used and aged, but still maintain this feeling of isolation. We know that other people use this space, but we never see them use it. This is highlighted by these windows that appear throughout the game. You can just about make out the room layout inside. They're meant to be observation decks that would be used to observe and study the test subject, but we never see anyone occupy them throughout the entire game. And this isn't just a one-time thing. These observation decks never stop appearing throughout the game. Every test chamber has at least one, and so like a looming shadow, it's an ever-present yet subtle clue to the game's deeper plot. Similarly, the cameras also serve as seemingly innocuous background props, and while there are actually several chambers in which they don't appear, they arguably serve an even greater narrative purpose. While the observation decks tell us that we're supposed to be watched but aren't, the cameras tell us, at least implicitly, that we are being watched, but not by who. Both methods communicate the impression of other people existing, but both cleverly maintain a sense of anonymity and makes this impression purely inferred. And while one feels inhuman because it reflects the sterile and cold aesthetic of the test chambers, the other feels inhuman because we're looking into an unidentifiable eye, a one-way mirror. However, while you certainly can take notice of these things and infer any number of narrative possibilities, and indeed the game does eventually reveal that this feeling of isolation and surveillance serves a narrative purpose, Through relaying its storytelling in such a subtle and visual way, it's far more likely to be overlooked in favor of the gameplay. Structurally, the game is nothing more than a series of puzzles, and so anything outside of that is a mere diversion from the core gameplay. Because the puzzles are intrinsically rewarding to solve and provide us the way to the next puzzle, we're placed into a satisfying gameplay loop that emphasizes flow, keeping it going. And this is further supported through the way puzzles and the puzzle elements are designed. The parts of the game that communicate a greater level of narrative depth blend into the dull recesses of the test chambers, while the most gameplay significant mechanics are eye-catching and colourful. Take any screenshot from the game and the most important elements are also the most prominent. The purpose of this is twofold. It not only serves a significant gameplay purpose through making the elements of each puzzle clear and readable, but it also causes us to overlook and ignore the subtle storytelling. But through all of this, there's one key element that we're missing. We understand the effect of the cameras and observation decks in retrospect, and we also understand how the game wants us to overlook these things. But what makes us notice them? How do these elements turn from tiny background details into prominent set pieces? Test Chamber 16 is a mostly normal test chamber. It has the expected appearance and visuals that we've seen throughout the game thus far, albeit with the newly added turrets. But halfway through the level, behind a stack of cubes and a gap between the walls, you'll find this. A strange place, no less isolated than anywhere else in the game, but in a much different and more uncomfortable way. We see strange writings on the wall, surely deranged and disturbed, but uniquely and eerily human. Miscellaneous items like cans of beans and cartons of milk are strewn about the floor. We see an industrial fan, a clue to further inner workings of the facility, and a door which likely leads to more areas just like this one. And it's all covered in this unique color palette. The browns, yellows, and red tones are all in stark contrast to the cold whites, blacks, and blues that have filled the game to this point. This tiny section of the level, completely removed from the test chamber and completely irrelevant to any puzzle, is a puzzle in and of itself. Who exactly was here before us? Why are they hiding out in this facility? And most importantly, what else is out there? It introduces a layer of depth to the game's world that we previously didn't believe or expect to be present. Suddenly, the test chambers have all been recontextualized, not just as linear puzzles, but as the internal organs of a vast body with these strange, interconnected veins. That feeling of isolation is only enhanced knowing that someone was surely here before you, possibly recently. The test chambers themselves are the exact same, but our perception of them is entirely different. The world has expanded. Reality has broken. Suddenly, those empty observation decks appear far emptier, and the person behind the cameras is a question that begs to be answered. The world now doesn't just end with what we can see, but instead has expanded to infinite possibilities. We can see the inner workings of the facility. What about beyond it? And all of this newfound introspection and recontextualization is achieved through this small tear in the fabric of reality, one that draws our attention to all of the other seams and loose threads. I should make clear that this is not a narrative twist, or at least not necessarily. There's no character within the story who comes to any sort of revelation through the existence of this area or any other detail within the game. In fact, any character within the story would obviously know that there's a world outside of the facility unless they were born within it. The twist comes purely in the form of the player's perception of the game itself. It's a metatextual twist that relies on those tenets of a game's reality discussed earlier, that a game can be infinitely simple or infinitely complex, and that we're typically given this information at an incredibly early point. Because Portal takes its time before ever demonstrating that there's a world outside of its levels, we're led to believe that Portal is simple. You wouldn't expect to find a window in Pong or a break room in Pac-Man, and similarly, the idea that such a simple game would have a seemingly pointless hidden room like this is a detail that makes us rethink what kind of game Portal even is and gives us a new sense of awareness. The game then rewards this heightened sense of awareness through featuring more of these areas in the following levels. In Test Chamber 17, there's a den with a pile of detached cameras alongside an ominous message, "She's watching you." And just like that, one of our curiosities is being prodded at. The game has given us a reason to question our surroundings, and now it's stringing us further along. Now these cameras aren't just a what, but a who. This den also reiterates the author's unstable mental state. We see them obsessed over the companion cube, which is given to us in this very test chamber. This reinforces the concept that the facility and test chambers are incredibly isolating. It validates this feeling through showing how it's affected a character within the story, and it emphasizes just how empty and inhuman Aperture is. Chamber 18 features a den that is comparatively mundane. There's very little outside of a staircase leading to a locked door, more miscellaneous items on the ground, and some more scribbles on the walls. And I think this mundanity actually serves to emphasize that this mysterious character who inhabits these unseen corners of the facility is indeed human in all of their unremarkableness. It's the only den to feature a radio, and it almost makes the space feel homey, like this person desperately sought comfort in an undeniably uncomfortable place. These three dens all seem similar but ultimately serve unique purposes. 16's makes us question our surroundings and what lies beyond what we can see. 17's pries at our curiosities and emphasizes the isolating nature of the facility, and 18's demonstrates that the person who inhabits these spaces is human. Importantly though, what they share is a glimpse into another world, one inhabited by a character with their own background story, which is a surprisingly remarkable concept for Portal when you consider that to this point in the game, we haven't seen a single instance of a character with true depth, because while our protagonist Shell remains completely silent and therefore rarely shows a personality, our antagonist, GLaDOS, doesn't initially appear to be a character at all. Consider how Portal initially presents GLaDOS. To start, we're not told her name, what she looks like, what she does, where she is, and most importantly of all, that she's autonomous. Think about it. There's little to suggest that GLaDOS is nothing more than a pre-recorded voice. There's even lines that specifically allude or suggest that she is one, like how her dialogue includes these blank spaces like subject name here.
Unbelievable. You. Subject name here. Must be the pride of. Subject hometown here.
Or how it sometimes cuts out like radio static.
For your own safety and the safety of others, please refrain from. Stand back.
Ellen McLean's monotonous delivery is reminiscent of a generic robotic voice, and she always speaks on behalf of the facility. We will not monitor the next test chamber. We will stop enhancing the truth. We can no longer lie to you. GLaDOS feels much less like a character and more like a generic representation of Aperture as a whole. And what's this about lying? There are several points in the game where GLaDOS enhances the truth like this, and while from a game with no story this would just come across as a gag, which it often does in the case of Portal, the slow reveal of the game's hidden narrative makes these moments feel more significant. But the most significant of GLaDOS's lies is how she lies through omission, the details that she fails to include about the test in the facility. When these things start to become unmasked, and we're suggested that the facility doesn't have our best interests in mind, we're invited to wonder where the other humans are, why so many of the test chambers are so deadly, who she might be. She is watching is a powerful phrase, not because it tells us that we're being watched, but because it suggests that whoever is watching us is important to the story, a story which we didn't know existed until a few levels ago, and an identity which, through process of elimination, can only be attributed to one pre-recorded voice, one who wouldn't watch us behind glass, but behind a robotic eye. Ironically, one of the few times GLaDOS doesn't sound pre-recorded is when you try to destroy the cameras. There's a surprising number of unique lines she has whenever you do it.
To ensure the safe performance of all authorized activities, do not destroy vital testing apparatus. For your own safety, do not destroy vital testing apparatus. Certain objects may be vital to your success. Do not destroy testing apparatus. Vital testing apparatus destroyed.
It feels reactionary, and while most of her other lines could be chalked up as generic responses to motivate test subjects, these lines are very pointed. It's telling that GLaDOS is her most revealing when trying to maintain control and power, and it's an incredibly subtle hint at her true identity, albeit one that the game actually encourages you to discover through tying the destruction of cameras to an achievement. This is just one of many elegantly placed details that makes Portal's subtle storytelling special. From what we've observed so far, we can draw two major conclusions. One, Portal wants us to believe that it's simple. Through lacking an immediate narrative hook, little to no characterization, and being so constricted in its design, we're initially led to believe that it has very little to offer. And 2, that in reality, Portal is not simple, that the initial view we receive of the game is one wrapped in deception, not necessarily through diversion, but by omission. These conclusions draw us to 2 major states that the player goes through while playing the game, one being a manufactured false reality, and the other being the broader true reality. More specifically, the false reality is the test chambers, as well as the belief that the player has that Portal is a simple game, and the true reality is what lies beyond the facility, and the realization that the world of Portal is much more complex. But importantly, there exists a middle bridging reality that brings us from one state to another. These dens are the catalysts that bring us from the false reality to the true reality. Think of the film The Truman Show. This is a film that centers on a man, Truman, who's the star of a TV show. The twist being that he doesn't know that he's on it. His entire life is a fabricated simulation of the real world, created to perfectly house Truman with constant surveillance. From his perspective, his life is entirely normal, but after a series of strange events, he begins to realize that his life might be fake, and eventually escapes the Truman Show entirely. Just like Portal, we begin with a false reality, Truman's fabricated life, and end with the true reality as he enters into the real world. But those events that trigger this arc don't immediately clue him into the truth. He's placed in this bridging reality, a state where he knows something is amiss but can't identify true from false. What makes the film truly unique is its ambiguity. We never learn exactly when Truman fully realizes his life is a lie. Some even theorize that by the time the film begins, he already knows, and spends the length of the movie reaffirming his beliefs and planning his escape. As players, we experience Portal much like Truman. We're placed in a false world, but we don't know that it's false. It's only after the ones in control slip up and a piece of the truth slips into view that we begin to rethink the world as we know it and see it through a new pair of eyes. But similarly to the ambiguity of Truman's knowledge throughout the film, the way an individual player will experience Portal sits along a broad spectrum. After all, there's no way to control how much a player knows going into a game unless they're one of the first players. Many of us will play Portal now knowing just about everything about its plot. Therefore, the first den in Test Chamber 16 can affect a player in a variety of ways. Will it be like when Truman sees a break room behind an elevator? Or will it be like when a random stranger mistakenly calls him by his name? What feels more prominent to the player? The striking new color palette, the inaccessible door, or the suggestion that someone was here before you? Does this place provide a moment of realization, or a reiteration of beliefs you already held? Beyond this concept of a twist, these dens feel as if they exist between phases of reality. They're not just uncomfortable because of what they reveal, but because of what they are. This is something I find especially important to emphasize. Portal is not a game that should only be played once, and in fact a second or third playthrough is the perfect way to recognize and appreciate how the game works so well. There's much more value to the game beyond this subversion, which, by now, is probably not going to be subverting anyone anymore. But I find this concept of layers of reality incredibly interesting, especially how it explains why the game can feel so overwhelmingly uncomfortable. There's a combined effort, both from the fictional facility and the actual game itself, to mask the real world of Portal behind this sterile and controlled environment. And the dens manage to be uncomfortable for an entirely different reason because of how they recontextualize the rest of the game, or at least, most of it. Everything comes to a head in Test Chamber 19. We're told that the experiment is coming to an end, that we will be baked, and then there will be cake. And while the cake's existence might have been slightly exaggerated, the being baked part, that was real. And in a beautiful moment that reflects the tiny holding cell we were trapped in at the beginning of the game, we're placed on a moving platform advancing towards fire, our tiny containment, with an unreachable ledge on our opposite side, a window into another world. And for a moment, this is our reality, advancing further towards death, guided by an innocuous robotic voice. It's hopeless. It's in this moment where we're finally tested to recognize the feeling of isolation and imprisonment, the notion of freedom, and the desire to escape. This is Portal's escape sequence. And this is pretty genius. We've already seen the progression of the dens in the previous 3 test chambers, so what better way to conclude this progression by placing the entire final sequence of the game in this strange, otherworldly dimension? It's an ideal progression in the gameplay as well. That sense of heightened awareness developed through the dens is tested here through replacing the bold and readable puzzle elements with a dark and obscure labyrinth, which is much less about putting together pieces and instead navigating a maze. It's remarkable how well the game manages to maintain puzzle design in areas of the game which canonically are anything but puzzles. There's a real sense of interconnectedness on display here. We get to look through the other side of the observation decks, back into areas we've already been, and it emphasizes that concept of recontextualization established earlier. These are the same locations, but viewed with a new set of eyes. And if that feeling of isolation wasn't prevalent before, exploring the facility in this state, with offices that are entirely empty, makes this feeling all the more real. It's overwhelmingly quiet. It's here that the gameplay really takes a backseat in favor of the atmosphere, mood, and tone, and this is especially emphasized by GLaDOS' dialogue. The way that she initially reacts when you escape from the fire pit is an incredible combination of delivery and post-processing. It's the first time she really expresses emotion, and it's underlined by this glitchy stuttering effect.
What are you doing? Stop it. We are pleased that you made it through the final challenge where we pretended we were going to murder you.
It's almost like her reality is breaking, like she's been so used to delivering those same lines to hundreds of test subjects that the very concept of a test subject breaking the mold and escaping her sight like this is something completely unheard of. It's here that GLaDOS becomes a character, and her lying becomes far more blatant. She goes through these stages of bargaining, begging, guilt-tripping, and misleading you, all in an attempt to take back power and control. The way that her voice echoes in these sections supports the dramatic tonal shift. She can't see us anymore. And that fact in itself is almost scary. We aren't being controlled anymore, but now that reliable sense of clarity, the way that the test chambers so deliberately lead us through them, is gone, replaced with the grungy backrooms of Aperture, which, despite progressing much in the same way, feel open and non-linear. In the final area of the game, right before we encounter GLaDOS, we're taken along these thin catwalks, and if you take a moment to look up, your eyes are met with nothing. A space so empty that it's obscured into a thick fog. It's functionally an exact antithesis to the world that Portal opens with, the world where your eyes always meet a wall or ceiling, where you always know what's around you. It's a powerful contrast that demonstrates how we've progressed, for better or for worse. There's a sort of idealism to the simplicity that the test chambers offer. Even though they're controlling and restrictive, they're comfortably straightforward. It's moments like these that emphasize the dilemma between captivity with familiarity and freedom with the unknown. It's like choosing between being trapped in a padded cell or being placed in the middle of a dark forest. And while neither are ideal, I think most of us would agree that there's a correct choice. Finally, we're able to confront GLaDOS, and it's here that a lot of those unanswered questions are addressed. We get to see her for the first time, and after we destroy her first personality core, we begin to understand more about her and the fate of the rest of the facility. That feeling of isolation that we've been experiencing over the course of the game has continuously developed, from a sinking feeling to something validated within the plot itself, and now something that's fully explained. GLaDOS killed everyone in the facility with a deadly neurotoxin, and these personality cores attached to her were a last-minute solution to preventing this behavior in the future. But then, why does she lie so much throughout the game, even with these cores attached? Well, look at the personality cores. We have morality, curiosity, intelligence, and anger. None of these cores specifically target or inhibit GLaDOS' ability to lie. But through removing these cores, her lies start to become much more vitriolic and personal. We get to see her true colors shine through here. This is Portal's true reality. It's the fate of the workers within the facility and the tyrannical artificial intelligence behind it all. Everything leading up to this point, the cameras, the observation decks, the dens, the escape sequence, that was the bridging reality, that state where we couldn't tell true from false, and it's here that the reasoning behind all of the visual storytelling techniques and small hints of narrative are finally unveiled. And what better way to end the section of the game all about revealing the truth of Portal's world than finally showing what lies beyond the facility, at least for a brief moment.
Thank you for assuming the potty escort submission position.
It's a bit difficult to comprehend precisely how effective Portal's storytelling is when it's such a well-known and beloved game. It's a game which plays with our expectations, yet the game itself has developed such a strong identity that those expectations have shifted. Portal is a game that begins as a series of linear puzzles with no semblance of narrative, guided by a pre-recorded robot voice, and ends as a confronting and tragic story within a complex labyrinth, all under the control of a tyrannical artificial intelligence, and this continuously expanding scope progresses much like an arc. In this sense, the game contains an additional hidden narrative which can only be truly experienced once, where instead of simply relying on a strong twist for shock value, the twist is the narrative. More precisely, the story of Portal is the playing of Portal. Every action you take, everything you observe, and how you progress through the game are all narrative beats in your continuously evolving understanding of the game itself. And while we initially believe the game to be a series of puzzles, what you ultimately solve through playing Portal is an overarching puzzle, one whose pieces are scattered across the entire game. And despite it being the only puzzle in the game without an extrinsic reward, no other mystery contained within the game is more satisfying to solve.